So unfortunately, we have not as much time as this movie played to have this discussion, and I really feel that...
I really don't think that's a bad thing, to have less time.
Well, this movie deserves as much time for discussion as it took to watch it, I think. I will start with a couple of questions, and then we'll ask Hamilton and Margaret to participate as well. This film raises the question, how much justice can a society withstand? And one of the things that I admire so much about your work is that you allow everyone to have his say. You do it with tremendous compassion. And I feel as though this film is almost a trial of its own. In other words, the way you structured it. We get to hear the prosecution, the defense. We interrogate the question of who can be a judge. And my question is, for you to have made such a film and your other films in the same way with such a sense of compassion, is it because you doubt how you yourself might have behaved in such a moment of crisis when your own life was at stake?
Yes, I think that certainly has a good deal of truth in it. But on that basis, if only on that basis, I would imagine that everyone should have compassion, because we're all in the situation of not knowing how we would behave until and unless we have behaved particularly well or particularly badly in any given situation. You said before you asked me that question, you said that I structure this film, perhaps other films too, like a trial. I hope that's not entirely true. I would not enjoy that being true, because I'm not a judge. We're not judges. All we can try to do is observe, think about what happens, respond to what people tell us, want to tell us, or don't want to tell us. But I would not be happy if what you said about me in that particular respect was true.
Well,
it would make me very unhappy.
Well, I didn't actually mean at all that I didn't mean to suggest that you take the position that you are the judge. On the contrary, what I like about and admire about the film is that you're not the judge, that rather what you're doing is constructing a setting in which, like in a court of law, there is evidence presented from multiple points of view. And so you force us as the audience to evaluate the information that you're bringing forth. You're more like the investigator, not the judge.
Yes. All right, fine. I hope so.
So I have another question. And you, of course, you have, if you remember, Henry Alter, the denazification officer, speaking about the folly of sitting in judgment, of trying to figure out who was really a Nazi, who was an anti-Nazi, etc. And you also show some of the denazification films, re-education films. You show clips of these.
Yes.
This is of interest because my father was one of those denazification film
Indeed.
officers.
Yes.
And so my question is, do you think that these types of re-education films can serve as conciliators, as moderators, or actually to instill a new set of values? And how do you feel about
Frankly,
this?
no. No. I don't think that. I think of those that I've seen, parts I've seen, that they were ineffective, partly because they were badly made and very obvious and crass pieces of propaganda. While I'm on that subject, one of the most odious pieces of propaganda that I ever experienced, I put in the film. It's The March of Time. That is really a disgusting piece of film. The way it sits on judgment on the whole country. But the other part of your question, the denazification people, a lot of them, I think, by and large all of them, did a very necessary and good job. Germany had that privilege of being denazified by people who indeed had, you used the word, compassion, who had understanding and compassion. And Henry Alter, I think, is a very good example of such a man. Other countries, accomplices, were not denazified and were still seeing the negative results of this non-denazification.
Would you go so far as to say that you see your own film in the case of the trial of Hotel Terminus, the trial of Klaus Barbie, this film, are they in a sense also denazification films?
No. No. There's just films about the times we live in, and what issues are involved in the times we live in.
But they have a sensitizing.
Sorry?
They have a sensitizing impact.
A sense of?
Sensitizing.
Sensitizing. I hope so.
They do. Take our word for it. Well, you speak about the fact that your films reflect the times that we live in. There's a constant interrogation in your work of what is going on in our time, making the connections in this film in particular between the Nuremberg principles and at that time the Vietnam War.
Yes.
And the repercussions of French colonial occupation of Algeria.
Yes, and Vietnam, yes.
I understand that your new project has to do with Charlie Hebdo. Is that?
Just in passing.
In passing.
But This I cannot talk about tonight because right now the film is in a difficult situation. There's a conflict, and
Well, I'll
so I
ask
can't
you
go into what it's about.
that you don't
really.
need to, and I won't ask you to do that. But here is the larger question that I would like to have you think about, or I'd like to be have the privilege of hearing you talk about this idea. You know, one of the ways in which the Nuremberg trial was groundbreaking, and it was groundbreaking in many, many ways, is
Yes.
that not only were actual killers prosecuted or men who ordered the killings, but also the propagandists were prosecuted.
Yes.
Streicher,
Streicher, yeah.
Hausenberg.
Yes.
And this principle was then activated during the Rwanda tribunals, where the radio propagandists were prosecuted.
Yes.
And so we have come to, thanks to Nuremberg and the Rwanda tribunal, we have come to an international legal definition of when hate speech rises to the level of a crime.
Yes.
And so I wonder whether it has to do with Charlie Hebdo or not. Do you think that there should be any limitations on freedom of speech? This is the easy question.
The complicated one comes afterwards. Well, freedom of speech is at the basis of all other freedoms, I think. And if you restrict freedom of speech, the whole establishment that you try to build around the very idea of freedom collapses. Now, it's incitement to hate. I think that's what you're asking about. Something that can be prosecuted or should be prosecuted. It's I don't know.
Yeah.
It's difficult.
It's difficult, yeah.
It's very difficult.
Well, one of the great things about your work is that you have always tried to deconstruct these myths of who is a hero, who is a collaborator, who is a killer, and in that way you're exercising this freedom. I would say it's not just a freedom of speech, but it's a freedom to say what people don't want to hear very often. Get behind the fiction and tease out the much more subtle reality. Is that fair to say?
Oh yes, I'm sure it is. Here I think you're talking mainly about the Sound Pity, and Sound Pity occurred at a time when things were building up and the Gaullist censorship on the past would have exploded in some way or other, because the time had come when it could no longer be imposed on people as a whole. So if we came along at that time with that particular film, as I say, I'm convinced that if it hadn't occurred there, it would have occurred elsewhere in some other context.
But we also see it in this film, and it's very, I think, personally touching for us Americans, to hear Telford Taylor and others, and Daniel Ellsberg, of course, question whether our own military and civilian leadership could be prosecuted for personal accountability, as was established at Nuremberg. And this, watching this film now, 40 years after it was made, and having these questions be raised by the film, is a very, it's a very telling echo for us Americans. And in that way also you're saying what people have a hard time hearing and saying. And as Daniel Ellsberg says, if we were to suggest that there should be individual accountability, we were written off as fanatics. We were written off as idealists. You couldn't actually suggest that at that time.
At that time, yes.
Do you think we have greater space now for this discussion?
It's, I suppose, always a little easier the further you're removed from painful events. It then becomes easier, perhaps in a vague sort of way, to talk about them. I think you're quite right. At the time when Daniel Ellsberg took the actions he took, was after all the most important whistleblower of the 20th century. It was courageous and risky, and one of the admirable thing about Daniel is that not only did he take the risk, but he also faced the consequences. He did not, as others did later, leave the country to escape retribution. He took his medicine.
So it may be easier as time goes by, but it still requires tremendous courage.
Yes.
And that's his lesson. I would like to say that for all of us involved in this project, we always, at different stages of its history, have a sense of being stewards of our history and our culture. The very making of the film is itself an act of resistance. Every aspect of it, from the earliest stages of production to bringing the film to this magnificent audience tonight. I think everyone deserves a golden bear or a camera for surviving the duration of the film. There are two people I would just like to recognize for their incredible talent and fierce determination and their fortitude. Without them, we would not have this film to show you. And this is Anna Carrigan, who is sitting over there, and also Inga Behrens, whom you've seen in the titles, was the editor, a brilliant very brilliant German editor who you can Google. She was not idle after she finished this film. And I would just like to say that it's a dream to be able to show it to my children, who are also here, who were born long after we finished this. And that dream would not have been at all imaginable without Margaret, Bodde, and the extraordinary team at the Film Foundation.
Well, that's a good cue for Margaret to say a word about the restoration of this film.
Well, the restoration of this film has so many champions. I mean, people for many, over a decade, have really longed to see this film restored and made available to audiences again. And I think one of the earliest and maybe most vociferous champions of the film is the writer Jay Cox, who's a dear friend of Martin Scorsese's and Mr. Ophüls, and he long talked about, you know, the importance of the film. And whenever Martin Scorsese and I, whenever Marty and I would see Jay over, you know, 10, 12 years, you know, he just would always talk with, you know, the urgency of seeing this film restored. And so it's always been in the back of our minds as a priority among priorities, to make sure that this film is restored. And Mike Pogorzelski of the Academy Film Archive has been part of that process over the years. And a couple of years ago, it really came together, and the original elements for the film were found at Paramount, and Paramount allowed the Film Foundation to restore the film. And Marty was very, you know, dedicated to the project and believed in the project, and we were really fortunate to have Olivia Harrison and the Material World Foundation support the project, and financially and emotionally. And we also had,
And Olivia is also here tonight.
and she's here
so
tonight.
we can give her a round of applause. And Mike,
And Mike is here. Mike Pogorzelski is here,
Pogorzelski
and
is
Jennifer
here also.
On from the Film Foundation. And we're incredibly honored to have played some role in making sure that this film is preserved and available to audiences. Congratulations to you.
so I
And
want to,
thank you to you. What I'd like to add is that when all these things came together, I wasn't even aware of it. That
The secret to success.
yes, it all came as not very long ago, as a tremendous surprise to me. I didn't know that there were people like you and so many others who wanted this done, and as you said, gave a high priority to it. It was just a fantastic gift. And talking about gifts, I believe Ham has told me a bit about it. It was a great, great effort, also financially. I think it cost a great deal of money and was extremely difficult to do.
but worth every penny.
Well, the result is really stunning. For me, it is absolutely. The way the subtitles, the way the all of it is calculated, accurate, accurate to the centimeter. Well, since it's American, what should be talking about inches, not centimeters.
To the
But,
frame.
to the frame. It is really a marvelous piece of work. Thank you.
And just one of the first times that when Marty reached out to you to let you know that the project was underway, he also let you know that Mike and Heather Linville at the Academy had found the original language tracks, the German and the French language tracks, which I think, you know, really give you so much more now. They weren't really audible in the first release of the film.
Yes.
And so I think that adds a whole nother understanding of the film.
Had been a lot of work, indeed, extra. That is something that Martin Scorsese did ask me when I found out about it, and Ham, and we talked about this. It was my choice, I guess, that I thought, well, this voiceover thing that was necessary at the time and was customary at the time, how much better it would be if the people in the film would talk their own language. And so the idea of restoring the original. That is something that I was given the choice of, and it is the choice I made. And I'm happy with the result.
Yeah, fantastic.
Now, do we have a few more minutes, or do we need to?
I think they're ready to go for dinner.
Ready to go. All right. Well, in that case, we will simply once again thank Hamilton Fish, the producer, the great Marcel Ophüls for this extraordinary film, and the Film Foundation.